The war between Ukraine and Russia is a multipolar struggle, and its source is Russia's aggressive policies. One of the regions most affected by Putin's aggressive policies is the Baltic region. While trying to revive Russian hegemony, especially in the Baltic region, Putin's plans face a critical move from Poland. This move deals another blow to Putin's hegemony in Kaliningrad, causing frustration in the Moscow administration. Let's delve into the details of this significant development this week. The activities in the Baltics and the military exercises carried out by Russia in the sea areas are concrete signs that support these rumors. Russia is deploying its navy forces to support the Ukrainian war from a different front and to intimidate Kiev's allies. One of the most strategically important areas for Russia in this regard is the Kaliningrad region, which provides easy access to the Baltics. Kaliningrad is a Russian semi-external region located approximately 663 kilometers west of mainland Russia. Therefore, the Russian naval forces have the opportunity to use this port for their purposes, which they perceive as safe but dangerous. Recently, Poland made a historic decision regarding this region. Activists from Kaliningrad and about 300,000 people expressed their desire to become Europeans and separate from Moscow. Poland's move towards the Kaliningrad region coincided with the aspirations of Russian activists in Kaliningrad to liberate the region from Moscow's rule and join Europe. The Polish government declared that the Kaliningrad region should no longer serve as a port for Russia's risky maneuvers in the Baltics, and it should return to its historical roots. As a result, Poland officially announced that it will no longer use the name Kaliningrad Enclave and will revert to its historical equivalent. Poland's Minister of Development, Waldemar Burda, stated that Kaliningrad will now be officially called Królewec, following the recommendation of a state commission responsible for standardizing foreign names in the Polish language. Kaliningrad was known as Königsberg hundreds of years ago and was part of East Prussia. Królewec is the Polish translation of Königsberg. Although the recommendation of the state commission is not binding, Polish state institutions are now expected to refer to Kaliningrad as Królewec. The Polish Foreign Ministry has welcomed the name change, stating that it aligns better with the country's cultural heritage and removes the artificial Russian name. The aim of the Warsaw government is to oppose Russification in Poland, and therefore, it insists on referring to the Kaliningrad region as Królewec in official documents. Another important reason for this decision is the result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Warsaw officials argue that the invasion and propaganda efforts by Russia have led Poland to reconsider the controversial names imposed by Russia. Each country has the right to use traditional names that reflect its cultural heritage in its own language, and it cannot be forced to use names that are not accepted in its language. Therefore, Warsaw asserts that the decision to change the name of Kaliningrad to Królewec is legal and justified. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Kaliningrad became part of Russian territory. This city, situated between Poland and Lithuania, became an enclave, geographically separated from the main territory of the country. Warsaw authorities argue that the name change is necessary because naming a major city near the Polish border after Kalinin, the person responsible for the mass murder of Polish officers in Katowice in 1940, evokes negative sentiments among Poles. Poland's development minister believes that using the name Kaliningrad undermines the recognition of a city named after a criminal. Hence, Poles now refer to Kaliningrad as Królewec. Kaliningrad holds strategic importance for Moscow as it hosts the Russian Baltic Fleet at the port of Baltiysk and serves as one of Russia's few ice-free European ports. Therefore, the Russian authorities strongly reacted to the change of the city's name by Poland. Russia has claimed that this decision borders on madness and may trigger a hostile response. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov stated that Poland has occasionally exhibited this frenzy of hatred towards Russians throughout history. Poland's decision and Russia's reactions point to a further deterioration in the NATO-aligned relationship between Poland and Russia. However, considering the strategic importance of the region, this decision appears to be appropriate for NATO and Poland. The heavily militarized zone in Kaliningrad is rumored to house several Russian nuclear weapons and is equipped with nuclear-capable missiles and MiG-31 warplanes armed with hypersonic missiles. The maritime border makes it an ideal location for launching an attack, despite its separation from mainland Russia. Poland, being one of the most important allies of Ukraine, opposes Putin's invasion and provides significant support to Ukraine by supplying weapons. Changing the name of Kaliningrad is a reinforcement of this support. The Polish government also takes security measures in the region, as it believes Russia may use Kaliningrad to pose a threat to the Baltics and open a new front in the invasion of Ukraine. Indeed, the Russians used the Kaliningrad Navy to extend the effects of the Ukrainian invasion in the Baltics. Therefore, Poland is strengthening its border with the enclave following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Polish military has erected temporary barbed wire fences, installed cameras, and motion sensors along the 232-kilometer border. Anti-tank barriers have also been placed at the border crossings of Kaliningrad, Poland. Furthermore, Polish officials are concerned that Russia may use the border as a new migrant route to the EU, especially with the increase in direct flights from the Middle East and other regions to Kaliningrad. To address this, Poland has constructed a 5.5-meter high steel fence on part of its border with Belarus, as there has been an increase in immigrants crossing into Lithuania and Latvia. All these actions indicate that a crisis related to Kaliningrad may arise for Russia. Activists who strive to liberate the region from Moscow believe that Kaliningrad is now in danger, facing isolation and rising tensions. Vladimir Putin, already dealing with issues in Ukraine, could soon face a revolt on Russia's own border. The tensions in Kaliningrad could fuel demands for complete independence from Moscow. Historically, the Prussian city of Königsberg, which is now Kaliningrad, has been under Russian control since the end of World War II. However, political activists under the Baltic Republican Party advocate for the region, located between Poland and Lithuania, to align with Europe in supporting Ukraine and rejecting Putin's rule. Rustem Vasilyev, leader of the Baltic Republican Party, believes that it is only a matter of time before the region separates from Moscow and reverts to its historically German name, Königsberg. Currently, there is a crisis within the Kaliningrad region. The area is isolated both internally and externally. The Kremlin has direct control over the region, and Moscow and local authorities use it to threaten Europe, fueling anti-Western sentiments among the local population. However, Poland's decision to change the name of Kaliningrad and the security measures taken in the region make it difficult for Russia to carry out propaganda related to the Ukrainian invasion and continue threatening Europe. It is a normal course of events for people desiring freedom to eventually rebel and pursue independence. Such a policy is currently claimed to be present in Kaliningrad. With Russian leader Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, the number of fires with unknown causes has increased in Russia. While Putin has lost more than 200,000 soldiers on the front, fires broke out on Russian soil, affecting the course of the war. The flames of the war went beyond the occupied territories and spread to Russian territory. The Kremlin's anxiety is growing. Every day, fires in Russia usually occur at night and in important locations that have an impact on the course of the war, such as military bases, assembly areas, administrative buildings, and munition factories. The fact that the fires occur in these areas confirms their connection with the war. Russian authorities start the day with news of a new fire almost every morning. Putin and occupying authorities who thought that he could achieve victory in a short time, in the early days of the war, have now accepted the reality in the war that has been going on for about 15 months. The continuation of the war is harming Russia in every aspect. In recent days, a new one has been added to the unidentified fires in Russia. Moreover, this fire seems to seriously affect the Russian army, which has a problem with weapons and ammunition because the fire broke out in a factory producing weapons and missiles for the Russian army. The factory operating in Perm, Russia was the only factory in Russia producing multi-barrel rocket launcher systems (MLRs). These rocket launcher systems are very important for the Russian invaders because, as MLRs, are rocket launcher systems capable of launching long-range missiles. PJSC Motovelika plant in Perm was one of the Russian companies in the European Union sanctions list. This is because the factory was producing for the occupying Russian army. The fire at the PJSC Modelka plant caused a great panic in Russia. So what was the cause of the fire? How far did the fire spread? What did the authorities say about the fire? Let's examine the details together. We continue to report daily on all developments in the Russia-Ukraine war. Our teammates, each of whom are experts in their field, Prepare the reports by adhering to the principles of accurate and impartial journalism. You can click the Super Thanks button below to support our teammates and our channel if you are ready. Let's start. A Russian oligarch-owned newspaper reported the fire at the PJSC Medelka plant, citing a statement by the Russian Emergencies Ministry. According to the statement, the fire at the PJSC Medelka plant broke out around 2000 hours immediately after the fire. Teams from the Ministry of Emergency Situations arrived at the scene. The fire had spread over an area of about 10 square meters. The teams were able to extinguish the fire after serious work. After the fire was extinguished, the press office at PXC Meralco plant made a statement to a Russian newspaper. The office official said, "Today a fire broke out at the substation on the territory of Enterprise. The fire was quickly brought under control by specialists from the Ministry of Emergency Situations who arrived at the scene." The fire at the PJSC Motovelika plant was more important for the Russian military than fires at factories producing weapons because this plant, which produces artillery systems and MLRs, was the only one in Russia apart from this plant. No other factory was producing MLRs. These weapons are very important for the Russian army. Russian invaders often use these systems to launch missile attacks on Ukrainian territory. Recognizing this fact, the European Union added PJSC Melaleuca plant to the sanctions list in December. The fire that broke out at the PJSC Merlinka plant has also become a hot topic on social media. Hundreds of different accounts shared posts about the fire. These posts reach hundreds of thousands of users. The flames and smoke clouds rising to the sky, seen in the posts consisting of videos and photographs, revealed the severity of the fire at the facility. One of these posts belonged to Anton Geraskenko, an advisor to the Ukrainian Interior Minister. Geraskenko shared images of the fire on his Twitter account and wrote the following. A fire in Perm, Russia at PJSC Mohylievska plant, which produced artillery systems and MLRs. The factory fire in the city of Perm brought to mind other fires in Russia since Putin's invasion of Ukraine. The perpetrators and the cause of almost all these fires were unknown. The Russian occupiers declared that Ukrainian troops were responsible for these fires. Ukraine rejected these accusations because the statements of the Russian occupiers were made to hide the reality that has now been clearly revealed. The reality that the Russian occupiers were trying to hide was the anti-occupation Russian organizers. Anti-occupation groups such as the Legion for the Freedom of Russia and the Russian Volunteer Corps say they are fighting for Russian leader Vladimir Putin to stop occupying Ukraine and for Russia to be free. These groups are made up of Russians who oppose the occupation, Russians who do not want to die for Putin's political career and personal interests are fighting for their own country and citizens. It is generally assumed that Russian anti-occupation groups are behind the unidentified fires and assassinations in Russia. The fire that took place in the Russian army factory was on the agenda of writers, war analysts, and experts as it was on social media. Many authors commented on the fire. Rajan Maynon, a European defense expert from the Defense Priorities think tank, was one of those who commented on the fire at the PJSC Mohylievska plant. Menon said that the fire fits the pattern of suspicious incidents at Russian military facilities, but there is no evidence that Ukraine is responsible. European defense expert Rajan Maynon described the fire at the factory as follows. This is but one of the mysterious fires that have occurred over the past several weeks in Russia. The fire in Perm was followed by the most recent episode, which occurred at an industrial site in the Kostovsky district of Nizhny Novgorod. There has inevitably been speculation about whether these fires are the result of Ukrainian covert operations, especially because some of the fires have occurred at military production facilities or the work of resistance groups within Russia. I know of no hard evidence that points to or rules out either. Since the day it started to invade Ukraine, Russia has suffered great losses at the front, along with the fires that took place in its own country. Russian leader Vladimir Putin did not take these losses into account when he planned the invasion of Ukraine. The Russian army is being depleted day by day. Here is what the invaders have lost on the front since the beginning of the war: 209,470 military personnel, 3,829 tanks, 7,502 armored combat vehicles, 3,533 artillery systems, 582 reactive spread fire systems, 342 air defense systems, 313 aircraft, 298 helicopters, 6,289 automotive and tank equipment, 18 military ships and boats, 1,132 cruise missiles, 3,165 unmanned aerial vehicles, 475 special machines for operational tactile missile systems. It is unlikely that the Russian army will be able to continue the war with these losses. Indeed, Russian youth do not want to join the army, and the Russian army is having problems procuring and producing weapons and ammunition due to the sanctions imposed by Western and European countries. Russian leader Vladimir Putin and his occupying army are running out every day. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has literally caused a major crisis in the world. The growing Russian threat in Eastern Europe has caused serious changes in the diplomatic and political balances in the Middle East. It's no longer a dream to see Israel's legendary air defense systems in Ukraine. Shipments confirmed and departing for Ukraine, France. Let's examine the details of Israel's shipments to Ukraine with striking development. The interests of Israel in Ukraine were shared concerns about Moscow. Terror and military cooperation are now converging. Israel's cautious stance on the Ukrainian war, including avoiding direct criticism of Moscow and failing to provide security assistance to Kiev, seemed to be changing long after the Russian invasion. Although Israel has declared that it will not cross certain red lines on the supply of weapons to Kiev, it has started to step up both humanitarian and diplomatic aid efforts in recent weeks while adhering to the position formulated under the former government of Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, which refused to offer Ukraine any anti-missile defense systems. Benjamin Netanyahu's administration increasingly assisted Ukraine with intelligence, particularly Iranian-made drones used by the Russians. Signs of these changes became clearer during the visit of Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen to Kiev. Cohen became the highest-ranking Israeli official to ever visit the Ukrainian capital. The heads of the Israeli-Ukrainian parliamentary group Knesset members Yuli Edelstein and Zeev Ilkin also went to Kiev to meet with Ukrainian lawmakers and other senior officials. In the 1970s and late 80s, Edelstein and Ilkin fought for human rights under the Soviet regime. Ilkin was born and raised in Ukraine. As Israeli parliamentarians, they both expressed their support for Ukraine against Russia. During their meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Edelstein and Ilkin urged the Netanyahu government to take a clearer and stronger position against Russia and Iran, deviating from Israel's cautious stance. Israel's careful stance on all issues related to Russia was nothing new. For several years, the Israeli and Russian armies have maintained a channel of communication designed to avoid any misunderstanding over the Syrian skies. This allowed the Israeli Air Force to attack Hezbollah positions in Syria without getting in the way of Russian planes or defense systems. Russia is also a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council and one of the signatories of the defunct nuclear deal with Iran, forcing Israel to be vigilant. The recent military rapprochement between Moscow and Tehran was thus becoming a major concern for Israel. Furthermore, the deployment of Iranian drones in the war in Ukraine has put more pressure on Ukraine to intervene more directly on Israel. Israel has previously refrained from joining its Western allies in any action that could harm its relations with Russia, which had rallied on to cooperate with targeting Iran-linked forces in Syria. Also, Israel had previously refused Kiev's request to provide an Iron Dome missile defense system and had given up on joining the United States and other Western countries to impose sanctions on Russia. But Israel decided to support Ukraine much more in this war against Russia's dangerous political and military moves. Recently, Israel approved the sale of systems capable of hitting UAVs at a distance of about 40 kilometers from Ukraine. According to Israeli and Ukrainian officials, the export licenses were approved by Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and Foreign Minister Eli Cohen at a critical time when Israel was reviewing its conflict policy at Netanyahu's behest. Israel has approved the export licenses of anti-drone technology to Ukraine for the first time since the start of the war, according to a new report. This was a diplomatic first since the beginning of the Ukraine war. It also seemed like a break in Israel's long-standing neutrality in the conflict in which it avoided provoking both sides excessively. On the other hand, the Israeli government reported that although it has approved the sale of advanced systems designed to combat drones to Ukraine, the deal has not yet been formally realized. Israel would not enter into any formal agreement with Ukraine on the supply of these air defense systems in order to avoid a possible straining of relations with Russia, according to the Israeli army. Since the Geran 1 and Geran 2 drones used by the Russian army have similar parameters, the actual deliveries of these weapons to Ukraine were, as we mentioned, more to test the readiness of these systems to combat Iranian drones. In other words, Israeli officials informed Axios that the decision was not a policy change, as the system is defensive and uses non-lethal methods. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense delegation recently visited Israel to see a demonstration of this system. The signal of the situation was actually given by the declaration of Ukraine's interest in the systems for a long time. On the other hand, Moscow was increasing its pressure on Israel to stay out of the game. Washington, Paris, and Brussels were increasingly pressuring Israel for more military assistance to Ukraine. US President Joe Biden, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and other U.S. officials have sent several messages to the Netanyahu government in this direction. The same pressure came to the fore when Israeli President Isaac Herzog met with NATO ambassadors in Brussels on 20th January. A few days later, during their meeting in Paris on the 2nd of February, Netanyahu promised French President Macron that he would re-examine the issue. A senior Israeli diplomatic source took a more reserved stance when speaking to the press about Israel's special interests after the Paris meeting. However, it now seemed that Israel had finally formulated a solid policy on the war in Ukraine. Israel will continue and even increase its humanitarian aid to Ukraine. It will continue to support Ukraine at the UN, including Zelensky's upcoming peace plan. It will not supply Ukraine with any Iron Dome or David Sling anti-missile defense systems or any ballistic missiles, but will supply a civilian alarm warning system against missiles. In addition, Israel will continue and increase its intelligence cooperation with Kiev. This last element of Israel's now coherent strategy is particularly important. The news that Iran is helping Russia with its drones has shaken many in Jerusalem and forced the Israeli leadership to reconsider their position since the beginning of the war. Moreover, Israel has described these recent developments as a diplomatic opportunity to bring Ukraine and its NATO allies closer to Israel's ongoing offensive against Iran. Much has been written about Cohen's visit to Kiev, which was met with mixed feelings. Cohen arrived in the Ukrainian capital with gifts, but it wasn't as numerous and significant as his hosts had hoped. Cohen pledged to land the total of $200 million to an Israeli company that would participate in the construction of a new hospital, but promised not to use weapons and was careful to avoid the Russian elephant in the room, even when visiting the Bucha massacre site. Yet looking at the bigger picture, Israel certainly had diplomatic success by reining Zelensky against the Iranian calls. Zelensky stated in his meeting with Cohen that Iran is the common enemy of both countries. Israeli ambassador to Ukraine Michael Brodsky explained to All Monitor that the Ukrainian side better understands the complexity of Israel's situation at the start of the war. Senior Ukrainian officials harshly criticized Israel for not helping enough from their point of view. Over time, and after many contacts between the embassy and the Ukrainian leadership, many began to appreciate the extent of Israel's assistance and acknowledge how far Israel could go with its own security interests in mind. Brodsky emphasized that the Iranian threat has definitely become a joint war for the two countries. In short, the Netanyahu government solution to conflicting pressures could be found in a more open line of support to Ukraine and the West, giving Ukraine security assistance in small-scale non-lethal weapons, or providing security assistance against Russia through a Western third party. Ukraine, on the other hand, is now preparing for the post-war era, where Israel's know-how converges. Israel's moral commitment to helping Ukraine is greatly appreciated. We hope that the relations between the two countries will become much closer over time, and Ukraine will be able to get rid of this Russian occupation in a short time with the military support of Israel.